Welcome to episode 34 of the NORMLESS podcast. My name is Dean Summers.
You've now ticked off 6 of the 7 channels in the Ocean 7. I guess what was it that got you into swimming 10 years ago in 2013, and why is it such a big part of your life now?
Well, prior to 2013 and from 2000, I'd taken up a job in Sydney, moved from Western Australia to head up an organisation called the International Transport Workers Federation. My job was to prosecute an international campaign looking after the health, safety and welfare of international seafarers. So it's an extension of my life as a union official and an extension of my life again as a seafarer myself. So these are some of the most vulnerable people, and I needed vulnerable workers in the world, and they visit our ports, so they need our protection, and we need to look at around the world and protect them all around the world, and the ITF does that very, very well. So halfway through my tenure, or a little bit more than halfway through, there was just a junction in my personal life. My career was really, there was a lot of work to be done. It was very demanding, and I could have continued on unhealthily and still managed the work, but it was having an impact on me. And so I made a conscious decision to turn left instead of right and find or try to refine the joy of swimming as I did when I was a kid. And so I did that in Marrickville, New South Wales. There was a pool that had just been refurbished. I started mucking around in that, a few laps here and laps there. I found it very, very hard to get back into. And somebody suggested that I go to Andrew Boyd Charlton. And I don't know, Hayden, if you've ever been to that pool in the city. It is exquisite. It's really perfectly situated and a pleasure to swim in. And I started swimming seriously there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful pool. I've seen, I haven't actually been in there myself. I've been, on the outskirts of it, but I used to swim a little bit at the Andrew Boyd Charlton in Balgowlah. So yeah, it's a beautiful place. And when you started there, you met one man, which would take you a long way with your swimming career. Tell us a little bit about how you actually got into tackling the English Channel and that one man who really helped you with getting your training in order and developing really good habits with your swimming.
Well, I moved to ABC, Andrew Boyd Charlton, because it's a swimmer's pool. It had lanes dedicated to doing laps. There were some kids jumping and doing bombies on the side. I was guilty of that as a kid as well, so I'm not dirty on them. But this pool was just for laps and training and serious to very serious swimmers. So I moved to that. I travelled from where I was living in the inner west every day. I started swimming there, but very quickly I realised I needed a bit of instruction, a bit of support. And somebody said, if you wanted to really be serious about swimming, then you should talk to this guy, this coach called Vlad. And I said, oh, okay. So I spotted him one day and just kind of watched him dealing with a few other swimmers. He was loud, he was positive. And after a few sessions, I thought, I'm going to go and have a talk to him and see what he thinks. So I said, can I book some time, Vlad, with you in the near future and get some stroke correction so that I can swim better? He said, sure. He said, I've been watching you. You swim terribly. This is what you have to do. I said, okay, well, I'll come back soon. No, jump in the water straight away. So from within 3 or 4 minutes of meeting him, I was in the water getting stroke correction. And anybody who swam with Vlad's highly successful squad or just swam with him for lessons knows he's infectious. Everything he does is positive. And he's been my coach for more than 10 years and my very good friend as well.
What I understand from Vlad is that he's a very strong with his coaching, but he's also, takes really good care of people like yourself and the athletes he works with. But do you think because of your background growing up, in the unions and as a seafarer, and you've cited a lot of times that throughout those careers, in your upbringing, it was very intense and the work you're doing was very unforgiving and tiresome. Do you think that working with a coach that was, quite an intense character, helped kind of get the best out of you as a swimmer as well? And what did you learn through working with Vlad as, him as a person?
Well, Vlad brings to swimming in Australia a unique blend of Eastern European toughness, like he did quite a bit of time in Moscow University. So he brings that hardcore toughness. Don't complain. I don't want to hear any complaints, mixed with a whole lot of Western values and science. And so that blend comes together perfectly, because for me, I don't want a coach that's going to scream and yell and abuse. And we've all come across those in our times. And that may work for some people. Some people need the back of the axe. And I certainly don't. And I wouldn't cop it for a minute anyway. But Vlad's strong. I learned very quickly to trust his judgment. He's got such a strong pedigree behind him with swimmers, and the stable that Vlad now presides over, I think is the correct word, is almost 80 English Channel swimmers that he's personally coached. He's personally written programs for and seen them and nursed them along the way right up to the English Channel. And that's just one marker. Other markers are international triple crowns. And now I'm very happy to say longest Australian swim. So he has a lot of skin in the game. He's got an enormous amount of experience, but East and West come together and give Vlad a unique blend of enthusiasm, of positivity, and yes, you can. I've never heard him say to someone, you can't do this. And people that have come close to Vlad and said, do you think I can? And as soon as I say that, I know Vlad's going to say, of course you can. It doesn't matter what it's going to be. You can do it because of his positivity, and he'll get you there. If you believe in him and listen to what he says, he'll get you whatever goal you want to do.
So let's have a little bit of a chat now about the periodization for long distance swimming. And I understand Vlad had you doing squads 4 days a week, and then on the weekend you'd have one big, really long duration swim. What did a typical kind of week of training look like in the lead up to your English Channel swim initially?
So he's got quite a pro forma for the English Channel swim, and he knows what sort of distances swimmers need. But each one is then personalised. So he'll look at you. He knows what you need to do. Monday and Tuesday, for example, are stroke corrections, so that's very personalised. But he does it inside the whole squad and just keep adding little bits and pieces to your stroke and tell you where you're going wrong, what you can do to improve, how you can go faster, when you should go slower. And making you most efficient that you can be. So Monday and Tuesday are stroke correction, Wednesday's high intensity, and it doesn't take any prisoners. So anybody thinking come to a squad, probably best not the first day come to Wednesdays. And that's just under 5 kilometres each squad session. And Wednesday is an aerobic threshold and no place for the faint of heart. So you're in there, that brings stamina, that builds confidence. And then Thursday's a rest day, and rest days, of course, are very important. Any athlete understands the importance of rest. And I was listening, just by the way, to your interview with Dom Tomaso yesterday, and his mum is the second coach to Vlad. So we have Jay with us all the time on the pool deck as well. And I started training with Jay more than 10 years ago, and now she's the coach. So she complements Vlad's work very well, and is just a wonderful sort of blending of athletic sort of opinion. When we talked to Dom yesterday, I think about Jay's contribution to the swim and to Vlad's squad, and now you're interviewing me. So I like the way that that's all come together. And some of the things that Dom says and Jay echoes are very philosophical about athletes. And so I appreciated that. So then we got Thursdays are off. Fridays are sprint days. So we do a warm up and then about maybe 50 times 50s. And then Saturdays are long swims. And we used to go up and down the coast and pick any sort of metropolitan beach, but we've settled at Coogee now because it suits us. It's a very good base. It's a wonderful place to swim, and you've got the Wedding Cake Island to swim around, and we've got a very strong swim community here, not only Vlad's but others as well. So Saturdays can be anywhere up to 8-hour swims in the ocean, and you've got to get your head in the right place for those, and that's where the long distance work is done. So you build your fitness through the week, but you get your head around ocean swimming, swimming away from the coast, swimming in all sorts of weathers, conditions and temperatures. The work is really done on Saturday long swims, and then Sunday rest again.
The big elephant in the room here is the conditions, obviously, the cold. Now, the English Channel, swimming, I think it was the north channel. So from Ireland to Scotland, blistering cold conditions, not only the water, but the air. How did you acclimatize to that? I heard, some quite funny stories about how when you were going for the English Channel, there was periods where your daughter would be inside, crying and having a tantrum because she didn't have her beanie or a scarf and she wasn't warm enough. Yet you were out in the backyard in an ice bath, working up towards acclimatizing yourself for those colder conditions. So
So cold is a big element. It's a matter of getting your head around it, embracing it, getting your body prepared for it, and then accepting it. You can't go into a long swim fearing that it may be 1 degree less than you're prepared for. So the cutoff for the English Channel and the way to qualify is to do 6 hours in under 16 degrees. And in the early days, we used to go down to Melbourne and swim in Brighton Baths down there. And that was nice, but it's a long way to go. It's not the ocean, it's the bay. It's a little murkier than what we expect. And they're great people, but we've got it here as we've got the same conditions here if we look for it. For the English Channel, we have some really good conditions. So the temperatures in Australia come down. At the same time, the English Channel's coming up. And so about June, July, August, they should be about the same temperature. So it's just lifting off and then flying to the UK and doing the English Channel. But in order to get comfortable in 16 and probably 15, then you have to take yourself out of the comfort zone. And you would know yourself in the ocean that you can tell the difference between 15 and 16. 1 degree in the water is an enormous drop, and you have to be prepared for that. And the English Channel can be anywhere from 15 to 17 or 18. So, in a good year for swimmers, it can be quite warm, but you've got to be prepared for the cold. So that's about swimming in the ocean. It's about going to Brighton Sands because I think that's the shallowest water around. You can get a really long stretch of 12 kilometres from the pavilion up to the airport, down to the river and back again. It's a 12-kilometre stretch, which is perfect for us swimmers. And the water can be, I'd say, in the middle of winter, could be 13 degrees. So it gives you everything you need for cold training. It's on our doorstep. You don't have to fly and travel, and you can have family and friends come and support you. And so Vlad will do 1, sometimes 2 cold camps, and he gets people from other squads and whoever else wants to come along, and that's coming up in June. This year I'll be on the beach watching my friends shivering and freezing and feeling the pain and squealing, knowing that I've been there myself for the last 5 or 6 years. So, it's time for someone else to take the mantle over. But it's serious work. But you find that your body can take it and your resilience builds and your exposure to cold isn't as bad as what you would have thought. And once you do your qualifying, so the English Channel rules is 6 hours at under 16. Vlad builds on that a bit and wants us to do 8 hours in under 16, and we achieve that every single time. Everybody who goes off to swim the English Channel from Vlad has done the 8 hours. And so an English Channel shouldn't be much more than that, maybe 12 or 14 hours. But it's incredible how your body adapts, and very quickly. And if you do it 1 year, the next year is easy. It's muscle memory. It's all the things we know from a physiological point of view, and your body starts to acclimatize and expect that. Of course, the first cold water of the season is a little bit hard to cop, but you're straight back into it again. And so when it came time to do the North Channel, it was anywhere from 12 degrees to 15 degrees. And I had to prepare for that. That was when my family was kicking back a bit. My daughter was, you're right, she was sitting in the lounge room with the windows open, the fire wasn't allowed to be lit. She had 2 beanies on and just the scowl and groaning and grizzling for a very long time. It was a nice bit of peace and quiet to sit out the back in an ice bath in the kiddie swimming pool. But you do those things and you continue to push yourself lower and more exposure to it and relax into it, and just know that that cold isn't going to hurt you. Cold is controllable. Your body will adapt. You just got to expose it gently more and more, and you get there in the end.
You talk about kind of like the concept of super compensation and how over time, as you become accustomed to, the physiological stresses of exercise or swimming or whatever it may be, you get fitter aerobically or you get stronger, improved muscular endurance, but nothing would have prepared you for that, the Northern Channel swim that you did, from Ireland, Belfast Island to Scotland, where you actually had some kidney stones there 24 hours or so before you did that swim. How do you kind of center yourself?
I tried to, so horses for courses, I tried to, for the North Channel, I wanted to get there 3 or 4 days earlier. I wanted to sit on the beach, understand the conditions we're in. So I wasn't going to get blue bottle stings, but it was quite likely that we were going to get lion mange jellyfish, which are huge. The size of a small car, their tentacle goes for tens and tens of meters, and they sting like buggery, but we're used to blue bottles here, so they're not as bad as blue bottles. They don't hang around for long. So we know that's an issue. I know it's very unlikely there's going to be anything else in that ocean that's going to cause me any sort of risk. So that's out of the way. The factor is cold, so I have to remind myself in those quiet hours before a swim that I've done all the cold. Nothing can be colder than midnight in 12 degrees water off La Perouse, lonely and cold and dark and raining. So I've done all that stuff. So just reassure myself that all of the hard work's been done. This is the easy bit. This should be the bit that we enjoy. And get yourself in that mindset just beforehand. And the mindset is everything. But when you're going to do Molokai, for example, you know, okay, this is a very long swim. This is 50 kilometres if I go in a straight line. There is a possibility that there'll be other marine risks or threats in the water. And what are you going to do about it? But we've thought, we've spoken about it. Everything's already done. And that's an important place to be just before you swim. In the North Channel, I had my head in the right place. I was set. I was very relaxed. And then, as you said, it was 48 hours before the swim. I had this horrible stabbing pain in my back. And I learned very quickly it was a kidney stone. I couldn't go into the hospital or the doctors. I didn't want any medication because that'll disqualify me out of the swim. And I writhed in agony for full 24 hours. I was absolutely in pain, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't do all the things. When I should be in a Zen-like state, I'm writhing in agony on the floor with no answers, and I've not considered how I'm going to manage this. And it's caught me by surprise completely. There was no warning. And so by the time I was just about to pull the pin because of other people waiting in line to do the swim, I didn't want to get in anybody else's way. I was just about to call the pilots and cancel it. It stopped. And I don't understand the human body, but it just stopped. It started, you know, it was aching for a while, but it wasn't the pain that I was experiencing. So I pushed ahead, got in the water, a little tired, quite fatigued from that pain for 24 hours, untreated pain, and started the swim. Swim was very cold, but I think because of my weakened state, because of the condition that previous 24 hours left me, I was a little bit more prone to the cold. I was a little bit more prone to fatigue, but we pushed off anyway. And the most beautiful thing happened to me in that swim, in that we were halfway across. We started at 4 o'clock in the morning. The outside temperature was either 4 or 6 degrees. It was a cold day. When the sun came out, you could see it was light, but you couldn't get any heat from that sun. And the cold was soaking into my bones. But at that stage, it was okay. And I was getting into the rhythm. And this goes to what you're asking specifically. As I was getting into the rhythm, I know I could hear the bubbles. I couldn't see very much. All the other senses have been sort of taken away from you, and you're just on your own in the water, following a boat, listening to your own bubbles, rhythmically rocking back and forth. And it's not a race, so you can take your time. You can't go slow. You have to go fast to keep the warmth up. But then Vlad fed me off the back of the boat, and almost immediately he called me back to be fed again. In my mind, it was like double feeding. And he said, no, there's been 45 minutes between these feeds. So for 45 minutes, my mind had gone into a really wonderful state that I could get rest. I felt rested after that, that I felt reinvigorated, fresh, and that helped me a lot. I did finish that swim in a terrible state, though, because hypothermia did end up catching me. And the last couple of meters of that, I was away with the fairies. I can't remember touching the rocks, but it's on video. I did, and I couldn't speak for the next 12 hours. So I was very much affected by hypothermia. But during the swim, I had some really wonderful experiences, but I can trace back why I wasn't in such a good condition at the end of that. It was nothing to do with preparation or training. It was just the unexpected. And that's the bit that gets you.
Yeah, I listened to the Conversations with Richard Feidler episode you did recently, and what you were talking about with him about when you got to the end of that swim, just how you weren't cognizant of touching the rock where your hand was. Sounded like you were swimming around in circles. What was it that kind of got you over the line? Did you say to anyone, wait, no, I'm going to finish this, or did they just understand your grit and tenacity and determination that you would pull through that? Because I think in any given circumstance, really out of the health and safety of the individual, they'd pull them out of the water, treat them for hypothermia, get them to the hospital as quickly as possible.
Yeah, you make a very good point, because unless I explain it very well, people might think that it was a bit reckless. And I don't want anybody to think that, because
Yeah.
Vlad is an accomplished coach. He knows me very well. He knows my stroke rate. He knows once my stroke rate starts to go down, less strokes per minute, something's going on. My wife knows me. She was on the boat very worried, quite emotional. But the boat skipper and the observer are very highly professional, very skilled in recovery and helping swimmers in any conditions. So I had a very strong team. I trusted them completely. But hypothermia doesn't sort of hit you and then you say, will I continue, will I won't? Hypothermia, you slowly fall into it and you don't feel bad. There's no pain. There's no signals for yourself. I can't even remember in this particular swim hallucinating. I just went cold, 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 and I could feel the cold really going to my core. And my core must have been pretty well below 35. And it just crept up on me. But they took everything into consideration. Yes, it's a slow stroke rate, but he's still swimming. He's not responding, but there's only 100 meters to go for something he's been training for 2 years to get. We've invested time and money. He's been swimming all day. I think that was a 14-hour swim, or 13 and change. Let's just keep that going and they were standing on the side ready to jump in. There was all sorts of things on the boat to help me if I needed it. There was a hydraulic lift at the back of the boat to lift a swimmer out so you don't have to climb a ladder. So all the precautions and the risk analysis had already been taken, but this was right on the edge. I don't think I could have gone very much further. As it was, I was stopping every few strokes, trying to get a direction, trying to understand what they were saying to me. And I only know this through video, but my hand, the rock, the boat, the water. What else? I don't understand how that all fitted together. So I believe 100% I was safe. Everybody had my safety first and foremost. The boat was just beside me, and I just had to finish that swim. When I did, I made sure I touched the rock a fair few times, came back to the boat, and then was straight into the arms of everybody putting clothes on me, looking and giving me medical, assessment straight away. And it's a very fast boat straight back to Ireland.
Yeah, and you guys had a bit of a laugh about how you didn't get a proper chance to celebrate your achievement, because that swim itself, you were the 40th person in history to complete, which is an astonishing achievement. Didn't get a chance to celebrate it, and then you were whipped off to Belfast Hospital with these terrible, rattling windows, and the building was almost falling apart. What, looking back on it now, what did that teach you about yourself? And how has, I guess, that influenced future swims?
The experiences that I had in each and every one of these swims put me into a different place and gave me a different perspective. So I still don't know where my limit is in swimming. I know it is where I'm suffering the day before and when it's 12 or 13 degrees in the water. So that's a physical limit, but that's not a swimmer's limit. That was something else. It just makes me want to understand how resilience works. But you're right, it does build up a collection of understandings and helps you get through the next stages, the next swims.
You're aspiring to do and achieve more as well. So how much further do you think you can push yourself before it sort of starts to become dangerous?
Well, safety, of course, is first and foremost in all of the planning and every swim. And you wouldn't go out with a pilot unless you're convinced that they took safety as the highest priority. So that's one thing. But in order for them to keep you safe, you have to do all your work as well. You got to do your bit. And so I'm sure if you take the Newcastle to Sydney swim, I don't know if you want to talk about that now or come back to it, but there are conditions that I went through on that swim that had I not had to go through those, then I think I could have got further down the track. So that's not an excuse. I never make excuses. I own every part of a swim. But if I hadn't got stung so many times by blue bottles and my body built up such a reservoir of toxins from those, I think I would have been in better shape the next morning. The idea of delaying fatigue as much as you can, the idea of delaying the inevitable onset of hallucinations has to be pushed as far back as you can, and then knowing how to deal with them when they come along. So I guess what I'm saying, the only way I'm going to find out my true limit is by having perfect conditions the way down, the best I can possibly get, being able to fall into that micro sleep mode, which for Newcastle I was never able to. And I was kind of counting on that because I was budgeting for a 40-hour swim, and I would have found it really hard to push through to 40 because I hadn't had a sleep all that time. My mind hadn't had a chance to switch off, even if it was for a short time. So my answer is that I'll only know where that is once I have a good run into everything. I don't have to put up with jellyfish stings. I can employ those little mechanisms that I've developed to myself. I can have time before a swim to put my head in the right place and consider what this swim may throw up to me and what other challenges I might have to put up with.
Yeah, it's quite funny how, you'd hear someone say, "Oh, I could do that run in my sleep," or like you're legitimately maintaining your stroke rate about 60 strokes per minute whilst you were asleep for 45 minutes. Do you have any means of explaining that?
Well, when I'm swimming, and I expect any long distance swimmer feels this as well, sometimes your head gets into a nice fuzzy sort of a zone. It's kind of like the twilight just before you fall asleep.
Yeah.
If you're in good conditions, you're not battling big, heavy subtleties or something, and your body's rocking as it should as you're rolling and turning with each stroke. And you're just listening to your bubbles. If you're with a paddler, a kayaker, a support team, you can give yourself over. You can let yourself fall asleep into that space. I don't know why, but I think it's worth a bit more study and a bit more questioning from academics.
Yeah.
How you can continue to keep that same pace up, the same stroke rate of 64, that's my ideal, 64 strokes a minute, even when your brain is essentially switched off. And Vlad was very surprised and delighted that his swimmer was almost unconscious, but still keeping the stroke rate up. So it's a very positive thing to do. I don't think there was any added risk to doing that, but being able to access that is a huge thing. And how far can you go if you can have sleeps every now and then? It's not like, keeping awake with outside influences for 2 days in a row, because that's really hard. But if you can just have these little breaks every now and then, I think you're in a very good position.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see kind of what your sleep cycle looks like, I guess, within that, how deep or light that sleep is, and, the physiological benefits it provides you in terms of your performance as well. So yeah, if there's any researchers and neurologists out there or anyone that wants to get
Happy
into
to help.
yeah, happy
But
to lend
I
your
spoke to
brain.
some interesting people. Like I spoke to people out of the military, how they deal with fatigue. I spoke to Phil Rush, who's a wonderful New Zealand swimmer, triple English Channel crosser. He's fast and furious. He's broken all sorts of, and he is Mr. Swimming in New Zealand. We all agree that you can't build up a bank of sleep. Of course, you shouldn't start tired or fatigued, but you can't build up a bank of sleep and then spend that later on in the swim. But you can go in rested, you can go in prepared, and there's a whole lot of different measures you can take to keep everybody as calm and cool around you so there's no surprises. And of course, nobody recommends you get stung by jellyfish every 20 minutes because that does interrupt every one of your cycles.
I'm really interested too. Do you have like a fear of sharks or, marine creatures? And how did these kind of like small wins you have, little victories along the way where you build up your confidence also applied to, I guess, being in an open environment, where there are so many creatures that exist and inhabit the space that you're swimming in?
In answer to your question, I don't have an irrational fear of sharks. And there's a big difference between respect for everything in the ocean and an irrational fear that's generated by television and gossip on the beach and, politics. I live on Coogee Beach, and it's the same for your beaches, where we have these smart drum lines that catch and kill anything around the place that'll take a bait on a hook, and they're just killing everything all over the place. And that's an irrational response to an irrational fear. And the responses from the politicians, they're only 500 metres off the coast. We've got to swim past them in our morning swims, and that's a little bit off-putting as well. And of course, the ancient technology of shark nets that are around our beach that just kill turtles and beautiful other marine animals, all in the name of protecting tourists coming to Australia. It's ridiculous, and I hope one day that changes. I hope it's very quick. But no, I don't have a fear of sharks. We see them from time to time. They are beautiful and absolutely necessary animals on our coast. I have built up a respect for them, but I recount the story in Molokai when I swam with a 14-foot white tip for 5 hours, and that's a smart animal. They're top of their food chain, apex predators, but with that intelligence comes curiosity. And I'm absolutely convinced this shark was just curious as to what I was doing. What the hell is this? And it just followed under me really closely for 5 hours. And when I stopped to feed, it sat off to the side and just basked in the sun. Everybody in the boat could see it. It was a big animal. But at the start, when I saw it, I was a little, you'd better be wary of that. But very quickly, I was put at ease, and I never picked up any bad or dangerous vibes from that beautiful animal. And that set me up, I think, for swims. And that's how I can swim, throughout a night, anywhere, without too much worry.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm saying in terms of those small wins or those positive experiences with the shark, and how that's likely eased, if you had any at all, stresses, being in the ocean with other marine wildlife. But talk us through that experience, that oceanic white tip, which we'd all remember if you've watched the movie Jaws. It's not a small shark, as you said, 14 foot. What is it like sitting above a shark of that nature, that size, and having your shark shield? Is it what is it? It's like electromagnetic field which radiates or repels the shark from you. What's it like swimming in one of those? And I imagine at times, if you weren't in a cage and you don't have that physical shield around you, it could be quite a tricky instance where you struggle to trust the actual shield itself. So what's the technology like, and what's it like swimming with it?
Well, thank God that shark cages are old technology. I don't know how people like Susie and Des and others around the world swam inside a shark cage. They must have broken their hands, their feet. Oh, it must have been so difficult. But now we've got new technology, and Ocean Guardian, an Australian, New South Wales-based company, produced a shark shield. So it's a hose, it's a cord about the size of a garden hose. It's about 2 meters long, and we trail that off a kayak, and the kayak's right beside you. And that gives an electric impulse. And it only affects sharks. It only affects the shark's organ around its head that picks up the electronic signals of fish and makes it such an effective predator. But it only has a range of maybe, I wouldn't think 2 meters, maybe 1.5 meters radius from the center of that cord. So you have to be swimming pretty close to it to be effective. And everybody, I've spoken to scientists, I've spoken to the people who make it, I've spoken to Ocean Guardian, that'll stop, they say, in 100% of the times that they've tested it, and they tell me they've tested a lot, a shark coming in at full speed to get whatever its prey is, it'll stop it. Those sharks can turn on a dime. If that organ of their body is affected, it doesn't hurt them or sting them. It just activates it, and they don't like it, and they'll turn on a dime and go away from it. So they've bloodied the water, they've trailed carcasses behind a boat, they've tried everything to try to get a shark to attack that. With a shark shield, 100% of the time they tell us that inside that radius is completely safe. So I've used those, and I saw it work in Hawaii. It was behind me. And what happened is that we set off Molokai Island, 50 kilometres off Oahu, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so straight into a nighttime swim. And it was a little rough. There was a big current, and I got caught in the current, as often happens, for a long time, for 5 hours. I broke out of that current about midnight, and I started to make some way towards the destination, and it calmed down quite a lot. when the sun come up, and I was feeling cold because I've been swimming for more than 12 hours, I thought when the sun comes up, I'm going to get some sun on my back. It's going to feel nice and warm. And I couldn't see the sun. It wasn't just up enough high. And a little shark came around me and the kayak. The larger pilot boat was probably a kilometre or a kilometre and a half away, doing what it does, looking for currents, feeling out the water. And so effectively, it was me, a kayak, one shark shield in 3 kilometre deep water between these two little ocean rocks that is Hawaii. I saw a small shark, maybe a metre, coming towards me from the front, and I wasn't worried at all. It was only a little shark there. They're inquisitive, but it was a pest. It was just swimming around me, coming behind the thing, and it was just circling, but just to be a pest, like an adolescent kid. And I thought, that's really giving me the shits, but I want to keep an eye on it. And as the sun was climbing and this small shark was circling, I looked down and the water was slowly becoming clearer. And just beneath me, there was a huge shape. Like, we go from a 3-foot shark to a 14-foot shark, like the grandmother. I always, for whatever reason, think it's a female shark. And that came into sharp focus very quickly as the sun came up. And I said to the Hawaiian in the kayak next to me, I said, "Can you see that?" He said, "I sure can. That is a big shark. It's the same size as my kayak. What do you want to do?" So he called on the radio, "Shark, shark." The pilot boat came screaming in. Everyone's jumping around. And the Hawaiians are only worried about one shark. They live and they breathe. They know other sharks. Oceanic white tip is the only shark they get very, very agitated about. So they were saying, you can get in the boat. We can come back here later on. We'll start from the same point from the satellites. I'm fine. What's the shark doing? Is it doing it? I said, I don't look. The shark's swimming under me. I'm feeling okay. I've spent a lot of money, a lot of time getting. So let's just push on. And they did. So we just gently pushed on. But the instinct of everybody now, particularly Australians, is when you see a shark, they're attracted by splashing. So my hand gently went in the water, hardly a ripple. And for the next little while, Vlad would have been very happy. He was on the boat on this swim, but it was very calm. And so the shark just hung around underneath me. I swam closer to the shark shield. So effectively all night, I wasn't within 1.5 meters of the kayak. I was outside the field. But when I saw it, it made me feel a little bit more confident coming next to it. Of course, the downside of that, Hayden, is that when a little turn of the kayak, or if you just drift into it, you'll drift into the shark shield and get a zap out of it. And it gives you a pretty nasty smack, like an electric fence would, And so for the next 5 hours, that shark came up close to me and then went down, went off for a while out of sight, does whatever sharks do, came back and took its position under me. I was going slow, and this shark could have done anything it wanted as fast as it could. When I stopped every 45 minutes for a feed, the shark drifted up to the top and just basked on top of the ocean. Everybody could see it, and it wasn't worried at all. They doubled up on the shark shields and hung one over on an outrigger. So there was electric bloody traps from me everywhere. And then I would swim off. I remember one time the captain said, "Just swim off between me and the shark." I said, "No, I'll go around the back of the boat and I won't tempt that shark any more than it needs to be." And then it just came back under me. And then we continued on again. It was beautiful. And I'd gone past any fear or any concern. It just felt so like you swim with dolphins. It's that spiritual connection that you make. And when I was right on top and it was coming up into the field, so within 1.5 meters, maybe 2 meters of me, then it would flinch and just get outside of that. It just gave a little flinch and stayed completely outside of that range. It then understood where that range was and stayed there. But looking down on it, and I imagined if I could get a little closer to it and hug it, I could not get my arms around it. It was all head and all girth and so, so beautiful.
What an absolutely incredible experience, hey? Like, just to be able to tell that story, and you must feel so privileged to be able to have these opportunities to actually experience that, in nature, unplanned, unscripted, just pure raw, form. Like,
and privilege is exactly the right word, Hayden. You are completely privileged, but it's not a privilege that comes to you. You've got to go there
and get
put
it
yourself out there. But I just feel so honored. People swim with dolphins, and that's a beautiful thing. But let's face it, a 14-foot oceanic white tip isn't a little cute dolphin squeaking around the place catching fish.
Yeah. Is this something that would be anticipated or expected? This behavior is something I would ask, swimming underneath you like it was for hours.
So there's two pieces of work there, isn't there? There's a lot of information on Ocean Guardian's website. There's some videos, there's testimonies about what they do to test, why you should be confident that these things are going to protect you. I understand that the Navy divers don't go down, certainly in Sydney Harbour after a very nasty incident, don't go down without a shark shield.
Yeah.
I think they can put these on their ankles and they feel a whole lot better about it as well. So Ocean Guardian are the producers of Shark Shield and other products as well. And I believe that they're working on a electronic shark net, which should do away with these horrible, dangerous, murderous nets that we've got in here. So there's some work for them to do in the future. And of course, they're enormously generous. They gave me 4 shark shields to use throughout that swim, and I use them all the time. And everyone got a little zap from it here and there. Everyone felt the lash of it. But it made me feel much more positive. And over a 20-hour swim like in Hawaii, I reckon I swam inside the field directly for about 3 or 4 hours. Most of the time I was outside, but it made me feel a confidence, made me feel there was something that I could do to lessen the risk that an unknown predator might have on you. In Hawaii, there's a worse predator that I didn't know about, and I'm glad I didn't know about it, but it's called a cookie cutter shark. Now, I don't know if you've heard of them, Hayden, but they are ferocious, horrible little things. They are only about 1 metre long, and to my knowledge, they have hit 3 swimmers in Hawaii. So their mouth opens up like a rubbish bin, flat. It comes up from the deep and it hits its prey, usually seals or other mammals, and it'll hit them, and upon impact, it screws its head around and takes a chunk out of its prey, the size of and it's just like a cookie cutter, and it'll just twist around and take a chunk of meat off you. So they are a threat. I'm not sure how they respond.
Also referred to as the cigar shark, species of small squaliform shark in the family Delatardia. Probably pronounced that incorrectly. This shark occurs in warm oceanic waters worldwide near islands. It's been recorded as deep as 3.7 kilometers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and they come right to the surface from that depth. So
they look quite small. They're kind of like little piranhas.
I think they can grow to 1 metre. But that teeth, I don't know if you saw the teeth on them.
Yeah, no, it looks like a serrated knife. Yeah, it's quite a
nasty little critters.
Yeah.
So give me an oceanic white tip any day.
I was going to say, when you're coming up for a feed, and I was going to say that shark probably wanted to have a feed on you for 5 hours or so, sitting underneath you. But I think
if it wanted, it would have.
I guess one of the things is we just talked about that really amazing occurrence where you got to swim for 5 hours above this white tip shark. Now, you say that one of the draw cards for you to doing a lot of these swims is the fact that every swim you do is very different. And I imagine that makes preparing very difficult for some of these swims, and particularly those like Japanese swims that are quite notorious for being very technically challenging. How do you train, given the nature of these swims can be very varied, whether it be technical difficulty, currents, cold conditions, as we've already spoke about a fair bit. But talk us through maybe some of the different techniques you might use with your training to actually prepare yourself for these more challenging swims.
Well, you touched on Japan, and I won't be doing the industry any good unless I just make a comment on Subaru Strait in Japan that I've tried 5 times. Very, very expensive. And the first attempt, there were some people that were absolutely committed to making that swim a success. And the last swim, that commitment had completely gone. The association had fallen apart completely. In the end, we had 12 swimmers try with the Japanese association in one season. Some of the best swimmers in the world, nobody made it across with that association. So their service, The parameters of being able to swim in there had completely fallen off, and it's all but impossible to swim that swim unless you have a much larger window than 2 days, unless you have something like a swimmer like Andy Donaldson, who was able to do it, but not with the association that we use. So that swim is now off the calendar, and you can't get a slot. Maybe you can get one slot a year with one guy, but that doesn't make it a competitive sort of arrangement. So the Ocean 7 is now reduced to the Ocean 6, and it's a shame that Japan's not off it, because there's nothing special about Japan other than the parameters. You can't swim in the nighttime. The association wasn't committed to it anymore. So unless you've got a committed association behind it, then it makes it so much more difficult. But each one of those Ocean 6 or 7 had an association behind it, had all the logistics worked out, and even for swims that had done only 40, so it was the 40th in the North Channel, the 50th across the Sugaroo. So there's not a huge base of experience behind anybody there, but they're really committed to it. And they'll organise all of the logistics for you. So you don't have to do anything. You just have to do your bit. You have to lift your end. And it is preparing for cold, preparing for rough, preparing for long swims, making sure your nutrition is right. But that, once you've prepared it once, you don't have to go back and do it all for a different swim. So you just modify and change and adapt your training to suit the next swim coming up. But when it comes to Newcastle or Sydney, never been done before, and hardly any information about the conditions, about how you're going to, the trajectory, the navigation and the conditions, none of that was done. So we had to invent that swim from our own experience. So Vlad has a lot of experience in coaching. Somebody else has a lot of experience in maritime. And then you've got the navigators, and then you've got somebody else and somebody else, the kayakers. So I had to bring all these people together and try to put them all on the same page. And to do that, I thought at first it was an expedition. It wasn't a swim. It wasn't a challenge or a race. It was an expedition to do something that no one else had ever done. And that was a big logistic challenge. So I asked a friend of mine, Warwick Norman, who knows shipping, yachting, navigation, but nothing about swimming. I asked him to come on board and become the expedition leader. And he and I worked through all of the logistics, the legalities, who goes where, when, how we're going to break into new areas. Because I hadn't swum over 24 hours before. I don't think Vlad had had a swimmer to swim over 24 hours before. And so this is all new ground to us, and becomes exponentially more difficult if you're going over 12 hours to 24 into 36. So we had to think about every step of this, and the planning took a long time. But I'm really happy with every part of the crew that I've brought together onto the same page. Everybody performed excellently, and they're all generous with their time and the things that they had. It was a great experience, but something new to us all.
Yeah, and I drive up to Newcastle University a handful of times a week. So I drive from my partner's place in Olympic Park. If you take away the kind of the trip, through the city and that, but like once you're on the Pacific Highway, it's 2-hour drive, hour 40-minute drive. And since I've been driving up there, I've been having a few thoughts about, like Dean, the swim he did, and conscious of like how far I'm driving, going 110 k's an hour for, an hour 40 minutes. Like, it's a big journey. And for you to swim that in 31 hours is incredible, given the circumstances and everything you had to go through. You spoke briefly there about Des and Susie just before, and Des was unable to complete the swim in the 1980s, and then Susie was unable to do it in the 90s, mainly because of environmental conditions. But what made you confident you were able to achieve that swim?
The confidence comes from my squad and Vlad. So it's called a solo sport, but it's far from solo. You don't train on your own. There was a part of the training that I did not talk about that, but the squad, it's everybody in the pool in the morning, knowing and wishing you best, training with you, and even in the oceans on the Saturday, they come training. Vlad thought it was a good idea to have what he called a swim camp for me, just for me, between Christmas and New Year. And the swim camp was doing 100 kilometres over that week, but focused on an 85-kilometre 4 days, and swimming in the morning and night, morning and night, morning and night. And that was hard. I call it Hell Week. But that gave me so much confidence after I finished that. Most of it was on my own. Some friends come at different stages to join in, but of course, it was my responsibility. Terrible weather, rough, lightning storms. It was just a bad time in Sydney for that, but it was my job. So I just switched my mind into it, and away I went. I did, I can't remember the distances, 15 kilometres in the morning, come home, feed, rest, 10 kilometres in the afternoon, back for 15 kilometres in the morning. And you just keep on going like that. And that builds certainly strength, stamina, but confidence. And you hit the nail on the head. It's all about having the confidence to do that swim so that your first stroke, you're not worrying, am I going to finish? You're convinced you're going to finish because you've done all the hard work. But Susie and Des are great inspirations to me. I have the very great pleasure of swimming now and training with Christian Renford, and Christian next month is going to be the third generation swimmer to do the English Channel. So that's something to look out for. And they're a great family. They're all inspirational swimmers. And Des is just a showman, isn't he? If you read anything, if you read his book, if you see any of those videos that he made, the newspaper reports, he is the ultimate showman and somebody who inspired me enormously. And I've got different parallels. I feel like I knew Des a bit, but of course I didn't. Susie is an incredible athlete, the first person ever to swim from Cuba to Florida and to the US. And Fidel Castro was so impressed that he invited the whole family back to Cuba, and they spent a week or so together. That was just an incredible thing. And Susie is and remains a huge inspiration to all swimmers, I think. So if I had failed, I would have been in good company. But of course, they didn't have access to shark shields. They had to swim in shark cages. Des' story is that he just cobbled his together in his shed, welded and put wire around some old Castrol fuel drums and some mesh around the top. Incredibly, my pilot, his brother-in-law was Des's pilot. And so I had the unique opportunity to talk to his pilot. He said Des just threw a couple of dolphin torches on the bottom of the shark shield, the shark cage, and they just rolled around at night. That must have been very disorienting. And of course, halfway down, very rough weather, it started to fall apart, and Des wasn't prepared to swim without a shark cage. And Susie, had the same fate. Just this big southerly came up and smashed her swim. So unfortunate, but they didn't have the same opportunities that I did. The shark shield technology, forecasting technologies improved a lot. And so I'm sure their commitment was just as strong or stronger than mine.
You touched on a little bit about your wife and your family and a lot of your friends and how supportive they've been along the way. I understand your wife, though. She's had a really tough time with the vomiting and seasickness and anxiety, I imagine. How much of a role have they all played in your journey to date? And also, what kind of a role did they play in this particular journey from Newcastle to Sydney? I understand your son was there right at the start, rubbing grease on you. How supportive were they?
Oh, they've always been fantastically supportive. But I might mention that when I started swimming with Vlad, I was a single man. Vlad invited me up to a swim camp he was having in Greece. And so I met Kylie, even though we'd been swimming in the same pool, we worked out later. I met her for the first time on the rocky shores of a Greek island. So, and we got married and everything else. So we called it something like V Harmony, like Vlad Harmony.
Yeah, right.
And so I've only ever known her, and she's only ever known me as swimmers. And so she's been incredibly supportive. She's not anxious. She's tough, and she has vomited the Ocean 7. She tells me she should get a T-shirt and an award for that, because even though she does suffer from seasickness, she's up there and back into it every single time without any complaint, and is always there, and huge support. I couldn't have done without her. And she suffers alongside me and my daughter with a cold and everything. My son is a huge supporter. He's kayaked for me, saved me swimming into a propeller of a boat one time in Japan. That was a pretty close call. Just stalwarts, and there's nothing they won't do to support me. And of course, my daughter, when we talk about toughness, she is tough. This swim was supposed to go ahead in 2022. We had COVID, but around the same time, she was struck down with very aggressive cancer. And she stared the cancer down, and an incredible toll to herself. But that impressed me and that inspired me as well. So she, one of the toughest women I know, just takes it on the chin, deals with it, and I can recognise that strength. And I hope if some of it's from me, that's the situation you find yourself in. We've got to deal with that. Let's get on to deal with that. So the whole family packed around Michelle through that time, and she recovered 100%. And I've seen some videos of the Newcastle to Sydney swim. I didn't realise how we were launching the kayaks. They had 4 kayaks. They were rotating off the boat every 3 hours. 3 hours in the water is a long time to be kayaking, feeding, listen to my, I don't think I was complaining, but listening to my slap, slap, slap on the water. But the video shows very clearly that the kayaks were situated on the swim deck of the boat. It's a 60-foot steel boat, so it's pretty heavy. They sit in there, they've got their life jackets on, they've got their torches, their radios, everything ready, a little esky with my feeds in it, and their back is facing the ocean. And then when the time is right, when the boat is pitched exactly the right angle, they launch them off like a commando off the back of this backwards into the water. Unbelievable. And so they were doing this 10 kilometres off the coast at midnight in a swell. So all of those kayakers, 4 of them were champions, including everybody else who was involved in that. It was something to see. The logistics just came together beautifully, and tough, strong, committed people.
So you left Nobby's Beach with all this big support crew behind you. Your son, as we said, rubbing grease on your body, getting you prepared. It was a long journey, as you said. You had a full night. The next full day through the night, there was a southerly storm coming halfway through the journey, and at this point in time, you were getting stung a fair bit by blue bottles and started to have some quite bad hallucinations. Do you want to talk to the listeners about what that was like? You know, coming up against that in the back end of that swim.
Yeah, so critical to the logistics of a swim when you take off is weather window. And so we were looking for a 40-hour weather window. It took us a long time to get that. We had 2 false starts. Finally, we settled on a weather window, and not as calm as I would have liked it, or the conditions weren't that perfect. I'd asked for the organisers to look for a time when we don't have a strong northeaster, because that brings in the blue bottles. And my biggest fear was coming into a huge patch of blue bottles and then being disabled from that. So they'll work on your muscles and it disables your muscles, and you have to pull the swim if that happens. So we lessened the parameters around the swim. It can be a little rougher. Okay, I'll come in on a northeaster. So we had to find this weather window. They found one. We're ready to go. There was a front due to come up after 40 hours from the south, and it was going to be pretty hairy, but we could make it inside the 40 hours. So we set off out of Nobby's, as you say, met the boat a couple of kilometres off, and it was really quite nice. It was calmish. The sun was coming up. It's a really nice sunrise. I could see big shivers of stingrays, and if you've ever seen 100 stingrays swimming together as one, it is something special to see. I saw those. Later on, the boat captain told me that in his experience, that's where all the sharks are. But I think there's a bit of inherent, not learned fear. I think it's a little irrational. He was worried about it. I wasn't, because I didn't know about it. I swam through the day. I started getting stung pretty well straight away, blue bottles, and there's nothing I could have done about them. Peeling them off, swearing loudly every time, that kind of takes a bit of the sting away. But they started getting and gathering around my neck. Of course, they're across your face, everywhere else, and they'll catch you. But I was getting away with it, and they weren't affecting my muscles. They weren't affecting my stroke. I was managing them. So we swam all day. The sun was setting. I knew it was going to be a tough night. I still had plenty of stings on me, but I went into the night expecting a really tough time. And I've told a few other people that I live on the beach, and straight out there I can see the ocean. And I've been looking there for years thinking, soon I'm going to be 10 kilometres off the coast in the water on my own. You know, that's going to be a tough night. There's no two ways about it. Your imagination works, all the things you can't even think of, you're worried about in deep black water. But it wasn't the case. It turned out to be a sensationally beautiful night. Incredibly, I've talked about bioluminescence and the stars and the lack of a horizon. and I was completely distracted all through the night, apart from the blue bottle stings. And I estimate they were probably every 20 minutes. The next morning, when the sun came up again, I was getting a little fatigued, more than a little fatigued. That front had started to move up quicker than what we'd all thought, and it was coming in much earlier. I was 16 kilometres off the coast, and off the coast of Palm Beach, and the decision was made, not by me, by others, to get in closer because we wanted to be safer when that front comes through, and if I needed to get out of the water, I could. And so we moved in, started to swim towards Palm Beach. They told me there's a beach over there, and I couldn't work out. I couldn't see it. I couldn't see knobbies. I couldn't see a lighthouse. I know these things are there, but I couldn't see them. So I couldn't work out. I couldn't rationalise what they were saying. Palm Beach is there. We'll swim towards Palm Beach and see how we go. And it frustrated me. That with fatigue and all the stings, I started to hallucinate, and you get into a pretty crappy sort of a state. And for me, it was like crash rails on the freeway either side. And as I swim towards my target, as I was told, then the crash rail, I'd go towards that, veer off the crash rail and here and there. It doesn't make any sense now. It didn't make any then. But the positive thing of it was that part of that hallucination was that everybody else was in the water as well. So it wasn't me. It was like a training swim. I was leading. So that's not like a training swim because usually I'm at the back. But I was leading. Everyone else is in the water. So I thought, if I'm getting constantly stung by these blue bottles, everybody else is as well. So just have to deal with it, cop it sweet, move on. Didn't stop every time I get stung. I had to stop, pull it off, and try to get it away from my fingers and out of my face and what have you. And it was building up around my neck. And so my neck was swollen from all of these stings. And it was starting to crack, and it was getting pretty painful. But still the hallucinations were going, and I couldn't get any closer. What had actually happened is the Hawkesbury started to empty out from high to low tide, and I was swimming into that current, that tidal shift. And so I was stuck there swimming, and it took another 5 or 6 hours. By the time we'd come in close enough to the beach, the decision was made to finish at Palm Beach, at Sydney Beach. Because that storm was still coming up, and I could see the track now laid over a storm tracker, that it was the right thing to do, get out of the way. And when I finally made it ashore, that storm came through very soon after. So the decision was made correctly, get me out of harm's way. At first, it was just to get me closer. I wouldn't have liked to try to swim into a storm, fatigued, hallucinating, 16 kilometres out of sea. That would have been reckless, and I don't think that would have been a very successful swim.
Yeah, I think my first encounter with blue bottles, or one that I remember anyway, was during the Nippers Carnival at Umina Beach, I think. And there was one, I must have been in the under 10s or under 8s or so, between under 8s to under 10s. But one young gentleman actually swallowed a blue bottle. And I remember hearing the absolute like screams and cries, and then the ambulance came down. And for such a small creature, they can inflict so much pain, can't they? So what, maybe explain to the listeners, one, probably the worst instance you've had with the blue bottles, and what it actually felt like. I haven't actually been stung by one, but for those listeners that have, they could potentially relate. But what does it actually feel like?
It feels like a white hot lash across your body, and it's so specific, so you know exactly where it is straight away, and you can peel it off. It can be like a fishing line. It can be quite stiff, but it stingers all the way down it, and they can be 1 metre or 2 metres long. They'll wrap around your fingers, and they don't come off easily. So at night, I had to hold it up to the starlight to try to find out where they were and try to peel it off my fingers, face, around your togs, because they slide down your body and stop wherever they bloody well want to. And they just stung around the bather line. And I was worried because, as I said before, their objective is to disable you so that then they can feed on you. They wouldn't feed on a human, but small fish. So there's 3 organisms in one, and one will sting, one will disable, and one will dissolve the food and eat whatever the fish is. So these things are all over me. I'm getting used to them, but I just couldn't help it. I had to scream out and yell and swear at every single one of them that hit me. Well, I realised that they were dispersed all the way down the coast, from Newcastle all the way to Sydney. So my fear of coming into a great big collection of them was not well suited. but they get caught up in funnels when you get closer to the harbour. And sometimes on the beach in Sydney, you can see great tracks of brilliant blue on the beach, and you know you've dodged them. But the worst one was coming in, and I thought I was just going to put up with them all. I was still probably not a kilometre out, and one stung me across the face. That was all right, because like you know where they are, can you peel them off your face? And Vlad had worked out that if he tied a Chuck's wipe to a rope and he could throw it to me, then I could use the Chuck's wipe to rub it off too. But eventually I was rubbing them back onto me, so that was reaching its maximum potential. But this one swung across my face and then swung its body, it's a small one, into my nose, right up into my nose. And my nose had been burnt so badly from 31 hours of salt water burn, and it burns your throat, it burns your nose, it burns everything else. It rubs on your skin and burns. So salt is very abrasive. And this blue bottle body up my nostril, it just burnt like hell. So the one across the tentacle across my face came out quite easy, and it wouldn't come out of my nose. Eventually, what I did, my goggles started to well up with tears of pain because it was so excruciating. Yeah. So I got rid of that, swam in, and when I got close to the lifeguard, who very generously gave me a course of which to land because the beach had been closed because of the heavy seas, he said, your best chance is near those trees. He said, oh, be careful, there's a blue bottle in front of you. Oh, yeah, don't worry about them. Let's worry about the waves.
I've been swimming through those for the last 31 hours. This last one, I'll eat it or something.
Yeah, that's right. Nothing.
Oh, wow, mate. It's incredible. But the other thing I'm really, really interested in, I think we've got a few questions about this. I'll pull those up in a minute when we kind of come towards the close of today's episode. But just like the nutrition throughout the journey, I know it's very different for swimmers, runners, little gel, packets of gel or energy bars, pieces of fruit. It's a lot easier when you're on dry land, but when you're submerged in the water, popping your head up to have a feed, you get an opportunity just to rest for a moment. You're still treading water though. So what kind of liquids and foods can you consume? And, how much of a challenge is it to get enough fuel into your body, especially when you're on this 31-hour journey? It seems like I don't think anything would be enough really.
If anybody's seen Andy Donaldson swim, he takes about 2 seconds to feed. So there's no treading water. He just does one arm drill, feeds, and away he goes. Mine, because it was a much longer distance, I did take a couple, maybe a minute. So the kayak's there, they've got the food. We determined very early on that I needed to be fed food at the same body temperature, core temperature. So I didn't want to be too hot because I needed to throw it down, but it couldn't be cold because that's going to lessen your core temperature as well. So they're there with warm food. For 12-hour swim for an English channel, I can get away with sugar, like maltodextrin mixed with a bit of cordial and water. That's enough for me. So I take about 30 grams an hour of maltodextrin, water, very simple, very easy to apply. And I'll just squirt that down and away we go. It's on a rope, they pull it back and you're not interrupted at all. On a channel like that, you'd stop for 20 seconds perhaps. On these, it was a bit longer, maybe a minute. And I had to change because 12-hour swim is one thing. After 12 hours, certainly after 24 hours, you need to take a bit of protein. Your muscles start to need a bit of support and recovery. So you need a bit of protein mixed in. We decided maltodextrin, rice, and it should have been savoury. I chose for sweet for whatever reason. I'm still paying for that with my wife. I told you so. Yes, you did. I've learned. That's a lesson I've well learned. And then there's other foods to be had as well. Sometimes I like a bit of white bread because you can burn that very quickly with some Vegemite because that's a strong taste that can get through the salt. Remembering your tongue's peeling out, it's burnt, your mouth's burnt. All you want to get is fuel in your belly, but it's hard because I didn't vomit at all, but some of that food I just didn't want to have. So I sort of put in my mouth and swing off and spit half of it out, try to get a bit in. But such is the community in Coogee that the local restaurateur, Barzura on the beach, cooked me up beef cheek, cooked the whole crew up beef cheek ragu with gnocchi. So it was 5-star dining on the boat. And when I was in the water, I think, how come? Why is it they're getting the good stuff, and I've got sugary water. So I demanded my rights to get a little serve of beef cheek ragu, about a handful, in a Tupperware container at one stage. And it was a midnight, it was warm, it was something strong. Just as I was about to eat it, a wave plopped a whole lot of salt water in it, and I ate it anyway. I remember saying, I better tell Rod that it's a bit salty, but of course that's the salt water. But it felt good. It was solid. It was what other people said. There's a psychological benefit to it as well, and it felt good. So it was just working out what I wanted to have, what I felt like intuitively, and what I needed from a perspective of nutrition. What I did champion on this swim that I hadn't worked out before is that to try to delay the onset of salt burns on your mouth, remembering that can cause swim off too, because the salt slowly goes down your throat and can develop an esophageal ulcer, and that's time to get out of the water if that happens. So I asked a scientist friend of mine. She said fresh water is the best way to delay salt burns in your mouth. I've tried Listerine before, that has some effect, and so I was swishing out with fresh water every time just before a feed. I was running it through my nose and through my nasal cavities, just flushing it out with fresh water every 45 minutes. And so that's how come I think I was able to get out in such good shape after 31 hours. Sure, it was burned, and sure, my tongue completely peeled out afterwards, but it was delayed so long that I couldn't get the swim out of the way.
Man, that ragu must have been just delicious. I think I did a marathon last year, and I've done some bodybuilding competitions. I think I've spoke a few times about that on other podcast episodes. But you know, at the end of a 20-week period of delayed gratification, you know, where you're starving yourself of food, or you've done a long endurance event, you know, even the carrots, they're so much sweeter, or whatever, the pasta, the rice. Like when you had that ragu and that, I imagine you had a few beers with some of your good families and friends, how much sweeter and enjoyable was that, I guess, once you finished and look back on being the first person to ever do this swim from Newcastle to Sydney?
Well, I can tell you that just coming to the end, I thought, oh, if I can get some sparkling mineral water, that's going to taste so good running down my throat. It's just going to feel so good. And my tongue, I could feel it was just about ready to come off, but you can't pull it off, of course. And I got ashore, and somebody had a bottle of champagne. Well, that'll do in the case of soda water. And that just felt really, really good. It just made me come alive. By that time, the hallucinations was gone, and it was a great crowd of people, friends on the beach. I didn't have
that ragu though. I'm getting hungry just thinking about it when you.
Well, I can't bring myself to order it off the menu yet, but I'm going to go back because it'll just have some sort of
association
triggering event. But I couldn't taste much for the next little while. Sure, beers were very nice, and I had some Calippos on the beach because that was cold and ice and trickling down my throat. But eventually, it's a wonderful feeling, and it takes a while, don't you think, to process what you've done?
Yeah.
Because all I was thinking about in the last kilometre was, how am I going to get these kayaks on the roof rack? How am I going to get this back to this guy? And there's 9 people on the boat. How am I going to organise them all back to Sydney? So all these things are going to my mind. I got there, of course, they're so professional, everything's done. And so I just had time to sit back and try to process it, and still am to a degree. That was 2 months ago.
Yeah, it's to be honest, I still like trying to conceptualize. I know what you're sitting right here in front of me telling me exactly step by step how you went through it all, but still to me, I guess it's absolutely astonishing. It's been a pleasure to chat with you today, Dean. I guess one thing I want to ask you before we kind of move into our concluding questions is, you know, where the future of swimming is at the moment, long distance swimming, and what lays ahead for you. What are your goals and objectives over the next, say, decade or so within the realm of swimming, long distance swimming?
Well, it's a great question. What's the future of long distance swimming, particularly in Australia? Because I think we've got an enormous future, and I think there are so many opportunities that we really haven't picked apart. We really haven't grasped. I was down in the Mornington Peninsula last week, and there's just coast everywhere, and it's safe coast. Sure, it may be a bit cool, but in the north we've got deadly jellyfish and crocodiles and things like that. You don't muck around with crocodiles. I'm not going to take a crocodile shield out. But there are opportunities everywhere, and I can feel that swimmers are thinking outside of the Ocean 7. For sure, those international swims are fantastic. And who doesn't want an English Channel crossing on the bottom of their CV. It's pretty bloody inspiring. And still, it's ingrained in the Australian psyche, the English Channel crossing. So I can understand completely the pull towards that. Nothing's going to change. It's always going to be there. But let's think about what the Australian swims now offer us. Palm Beach to Shelley, Timmy Garrett's swim. He's just pioneered that. And that's now a race, the longest ocean water race in the world, to my knowledge. Before that was the Rottnest swim. But you've got 1,000 people in the water in West Australia between Cottesloe and Rottnest. Wonderful thing. And everyone's getting the taste for it. But we've got to have something else. We've got to keep expanding that, exploring different opportunities. And when I mentioned that this was an expedition, so many people just came to me. How can I get involved? What role can I play? This is my skill. Everybody just fell over themselves to be part of an expedition, because that's the Australian spirit. And that really is the spirit of the swimming community as well. So I think we've got to encourage that and to expand it. For me, I'd like to see where, with the appropriate conditions, with all the sympathetic conditions, how far I can take that. I don't want to swim until I drop dead, but I want to swim until I think, man, I couldn't have gone any further. And I got out of the water in Palm Beach, immediately did a press conference with, the single outlet there. I spoke to my crew. We were looking for a bar that was open. So clearly that's not right at the end of my reach. But had I not been stung, if I had the option to sleep a little bit more, we call it sleeping along the way, then I think I could have gone further, and maybe there's some opportunities. But I think that I know that I've set the Australian record now at 95 kilometres. I'm just looking forward to the next person who thinks I can do better than that, I can do more than that. And I really want to encourage people to do that. And the first person that comes and asks me, I will give them my full attention and support in any way, because that's the nature of our sport. Not competitive. You're only competing against yourself to try to get there. It's a collective, and I want to encourage people to look at the Australian destinations. So that's where I see it happening. And if I can encourage anybody or any groups or the development of new swims, I'll be there. And I like to work with people like Tim Garrett, because he has this forward-thinking view of Australian swimming as well. So yes, the international stuff's exciting, exhilarating, and wonderful, but also let's not overlook what's in our backyard.
Tim did the Norfolk Island swim. Is that right as well, or recently? Or
well, he didn't tell me that. No, I don't think so. There's 2 swimmers around that, and that is an enormous swim. There's 36. One was Linton Mortensen from Queensland, and
Lauren, isn't there a Lauren?
And Lauren from Bondi, and they both. So he was the first man. Soon after, she was the first woman to swim around the island, and yeah, that's a great swim.
Yeah, lots of sharks though. You need one of those shields for that swim.
I don't know. It's such a healthy environment out there, and I've swam there myself. And there's plenty of sharks around you all over the place. Take a shield, because it doesn't make them angry. All it does is make them flinch off if they come too close. So there's no downside, I don't think, taking a shark shield.
All right, so let's just dive into some questions from some of the listeners who jumped on the Instagram page and added some questions for this episode. The first one seems a good mate of yours, Glenn Swift.
Oh, yes.
Glenn said that, would you come to Fremantle sometime to help me drink the bottle you gifted me for my 40th? Glenn's listening.
Well, I sure will, and I'm surprised that Glenn hasn't opened it yet. So maybe he's bluffing, but I'll be there in a heartbeat. He's a good bloke.
All right, Glenn, if you're listening, there's your answer, mate. And next one we've got is from Michelle. So Michelle, similar to me, she's kind of just blown away. I can't even imagine the effects of your body being in the water for that length of time. I'm in the water for an hour, my fingers are pruning, I'm ready to get out and dry up, and to go in there for 31 hours, incredible. But Michelle's asked, you got salt, the friction, time spent in the water, different sea creatures like the sharks and jellyfish, blue bottles we've spoken about, the darkness of the night, the deep, dark blue water. Where does your mind go? Massive congratulations.
Well, I think we touched on this, Hayden, in that if you're in that water and you think that you're going to conquer a swim, you shouldn't be there. If you don't conquer Mother Nature, if you're in the water and you're going to worry about things all the way through, you're going to have a very long swim and you're destined to not make it to the end. So you have to be at peace with your environment. You have to embrace everything that comes along, and you have to be prepared and mitigate against any risk where you can, and just be prepared for whatever's there. But you have to be relaxed in your mind. And I think even looking out at night now in the ocean, that would be so scary to be on your own out there. But when you're there and you've done the training and you're in the headspace, there's no better place to be. Even at midnight in the deep blue dark ocean with one kayaker, it was an incredibly humbling experience, but comfortable.
Like the adrenaline that comes with the swim, and all the experiences we've talked about must just give you that extra push. You know, like you're looking out the window there saying, oh, there's the beach. You know, wouldn't it be a scary feeling to be out there on my own in the water? But when you're actually out there and your heart's pumping, you got the adrenaline and you're visualizing everything in the deep blue water and all the sensory experiences you're having, you must just kind of forget about all those rational thoughts or the fears you've had and just start to enjoy the moment.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think you're much more rational when you're out there on your own. Unless you let those doubts work on your brain. But rationally, when you're out there, it's a different perspective. Looking back, like I couldn't see the shoreline for a very long time, but it was a good place to be. It wasn't threatening. I had my head in the right place. I trusted in the shark shield, certainly trusted in my crew. And plenty of times I swam ahead of the kayak just to have a bit of a swim out. So really deep water, away from the pilot boat, on your own, essentially, and in comfort. And that's an important part. Your head has to be in the right place.
All right. The last question, Joselle, hopefully I haven't pronounced your name incorrectly. Here's a silly, maybe not so silly question. After all the time at sea, what food and or beverage aside from water and electrolytes were you craving? And another one, did you see any sharks and how did you put sharky thoughts out of your mind? So I guess it's like a two-pronged question. Aside from the cordial and the water, did you have any specific cravings at sea?
I didn't. I certainly didn't crave for beef cheek ragu. I hadn't for a while. It's salty, but I craved at the end for something cold or bubbly down my throat. So that was either, I didn't care if it was soda water or champagne, both did the same job, particularly mixed with a Calippo, the frozen ice block cream. No, I didn't. I certainly didn't crave for a beer, but it didn't stop me having quite a few afterwards. I didn't have any cravings at all because I don't see that as being something that you're delaying. It's just you're having fuel as you're going along, and it wasn't even a factor that I wasn't having things that I didn't absolutely like. So no cravings at all. If you get hungry, you're in trouble because you shouldn't get hungry. Your levels and your nutrition should be very steady on the way through. And that's reflected by the stroke rate, as we mentioned. So my stroke rate for 31 hours was 64 strokes a minute. And that's an excellent sign that I was doing everything right. Now, I hadn't mentioned this before, but I did have one of the kayakers, Dan, and it was nighttime. I can't remember. It was early night or whatever. I sort of lost that perspective. Dan was kayaking just beside me and within the reach of the shark shield. And I sort of drifted off a little bit. And I just thought, surely it's time for a feed. So I said, how long before a feed, Dan? He said, 5 minutes. So I kept swimming for more than 5 minutes. And I put my head up again. Come on, Dan. He said, 5 more minutes. I thought, this is getting ridiculous. It shouldn't be playing games. So I swam off for another 10 or 15 minutes. And I said to him later, like days later, I said, Dan, you've doubled up there for some reason. I need a feed when I need a feed. I don't need to put it off for 15 minutes. He said, well, there was a shark right beside you. I could see the fin through the nighttime. It was making the bioluminescence light up. So I thought it best not to stop right next to the shark fin. I said, well, that's good thinking, Dan. Thank you.
Oh, wow.
And that was the only experience. So I didn't see any, he did, but it wasn't to sensationalise it. It's just a funny story. And that's the only shark we actually saw, or he saw, in the whole trip.
Oh, wow. Well, I think he's made a good call there because it might have shaken you around a bit. But knowing what you went through in the previous swims, it's ducks off the water's back, really. You probably would have enjoyed it, enjoyed the experience again. All right. Well, the last thing that I have to do, a little bit of a formality with the podcast. Is there any songs? I know it's a bit hard to listen to your music underwater with your AirPods or headphones, but is there any songs that are stuck in your head that sometimes when you're hallucinating, you might play over and over? What kind of things do you like to listen to? You might add to.
Some people go in with a soundtrack written up their arm and they go to that. I
Yeah,
don't. Songs do come into my head and then drift away, and
yeah,
problems come into my head and drift away. So I don't really focus in on songs. But night swimming is just something pretty special, and it does the whole rhythm of that is quite nice. But one of the swims I did with a friend, and we couldn't get it out of our heads for 8 hours, was "Where Do You Go To, My Lovely?" And I can't even think who sung that, but it's an old song. It's got a very strong French accent. But Des Mulcahy and I swam for 8 hours listening to that song, so much so that we got quite sick of it, but we couldn't shake it.
just going to look it up now.
I think the words are, "Where do you go to my..."
Is it rock and roll?
I don't think it's rock and roll. It's "Where do you go to, my lovely, when you're alone?"
Oh, Peter Sarstedt. Is that right?
It could be.
I pronounced that incorrectly. Peter Sarstedt.
I'll try to find it. I think you're right. Yep.
All righty. Well, we're going to add that one to the playlist. Thanks for your time today, Dean. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and your achievements are astonishing, really incredible. You're an amazing human, and so I can't wait to see what you get up to in the coming years.
Thanks, Hayden. I've really enjoyed it. And if you find yourself down in the eastern beaches sometime, down here in Coogee, give us a hoy and we'd love to go for a swim with you.